Access board docs. The link to the board docs website can be found via the D38 website on the Board of Education meetings webpage. To view the live stream video of this meeting, please go to the Lewis Palmer District number 38 YouTube page. Ms. Wood, could you call the roll, please?
Ms. Phillips.
Here.
Mr. Schwartz.
Here.
Mr. Taylor.
Here.
Ms. Upchurch.
Here.
Let's do a Pledge of Allegiance. I'll lead. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's jump right into agenda item B1, which is our Priority 5 update, build strong relationships through effective communication. Our Director of Communications, Mark Belcher, will facilitate this discussion. Welcome.
Thanks. How's it going, everybody?
Good morning.
Morning.
Well, good morning.
Enthusiastic audience this morning. I gotta apologize. I'm just getting over a small cold from my Thanksgiving travels, so tested negative for COVID, so we're all good there. All right. Full screen. All right, so what we're going to do today is a 60-minute exercise that will essentially take us through about 15 minutes of our strategic communications plan, and then about 30 minutes of an exercise and 15 minutes of a share out. So we'll get started with that strategic communications plan share out, and what I'll present to you is just a draft communications plan with the purpose of expressing our areas of focus and some of the strategies we've implemented to date. And then I'll just share that, it's a draft because we will continue to improve upon it. It probably will never be in a permanently finished state because we're always improving. All right, so we'll start with an executive summary, and we'll share that we must utilize a strategic approach to our communication. When we're working with our stakeholders, we want to maintain our position and improve our perceptions of D38 as an organization. That's the linchpin. That's what we try to do every single day when we're on the phone or when we're working with folks on social media or the website. Our plan is going to outline some strategies, best practices, tactics, and other ways to measure our successes as we set out to achieve two-way communication with each of our stakeholders on those platforms that I mentioned. And then those platforms that we're talking about are going to be, the most important platforms that we're talking about will be our owned channels, so our website, social media, newsletters, and more. So when we start this, it's important to look inward first, and we'll start with kind of a situational analysis. You already know all of this for the most part, so we'll breeze through it. We are a historic school district with roots to the Lewis School, opened in 1920. Since that time, we've grown to operate 8 official schools, serving about 6,500 kids through a whole host of programs. We also charter Monument Academy, and what we do is we offer a premier education, supporting innovative and relevant programming for every student, supporting every student every day. This academic excellence has led to us being recognized in multiple ways as a top school district in Colorado. So continuing to look inward, it's important to know who our constituents are. Our demographic analysis, which I think we're going to share more in this upcoming board meeting, is that we serve about those 6,500 students, about 10,000 parent and family stakeholders in our district, and that district is the Tri-Lakes region. So we serve areas such as Monument, Palmer Lake, Woodmore, Glen Eagle, Black Forest, and more. Our population has grown to more than 40,000 individuals, many of whom are military affiliated. That's 5,500 veterans and more who are active duty. In Monument, which is our largest area, with more than 10,000 residents, 31.3% of our residents are under 18 years old, so our student age population, and about 7.5% are over the age of 65. In 2020, as of that census year, about 87% of our residents identified as white, and about 11.6% of our residents identified as Hispanic or Latino. So continuing to look inward, we'll take a peek at the communications team. Our communications team is focused on Priority 5, as you know, and we employ 2 full-time communications professionals with a budget of about $280,000 for both our staffing and operations. Our director of communication is the lead for communications, our PIO, marketing, and more. Our communication specialist manages and orchestrates our digital content on social media, the website, and much more than that. So our communications team does operate several assets, and I'll just give you a brief overview of those. We'll dive into them a little bit more in our December board meeting when I give you a little bit more of a presentation on our marketing and our strategy and our campaign. Our website gets roughly just a little bit more than 1 million unique users in a year. Those unique users are popping onto about 1.7 million pages. Our storytelling platform, which we launched just last month, has had more than 1,000 visitors since launch. Our newsletter and our email platforms, which we operate, have about 5,500 community users involved. Many of those are parents. And then we have about 750 staff. Our social media platforms, many of which we assist on, but we're going to focus on the main district channels today. Those are our Instagram with more than 1.8 thousand followers, our Facebook with more than 4,000 followers, and we do operate a Twitter too. So these goals and objectives that I'm sharing are going to help frame our exercise that we're going to tackle a little bit later this morning. And we're just going to focus in on these, knowing that their drafting can be shifted as we continue to move forward. Our goal through a Priority 5 lens is to effectively communicate, engage, and build relationships that advance the position of D38 within our community and beyond. And I apologize, looks like formatting got a little messed up on the word "the." Our objectives to accomplish that goal are create a storytelling pipeline to share news and updates with our community and beyond, strengthen opportunities for effective two-way communication, including surveys, forums, and more, increase the number of individuals receiving our communication, diversify channels on which D38 is communicating in traditional and non-traditional means, use social media to share these updates and strategically amplify our key messages, and ensure our website is up to date for our stakeholders. We're also going to utilize our limited advertising budget to impact strategic areas of focus and our target audiences. Moving into that target audiences area, this is also going to lead into our exercise. So it's important to focus in on who we're speaking to, and we must keep them all in mind as we craft communication to ensure that our messages are resonating. These primary audiences are those we must reach, and our secondary audiences are those we should reach if we can or do have bandwidth. So those primary target audiences aren't going to come as a surprise. It's our students, our parents, our staff, and then the broader community. And we're roughly defining the broader community as those who might not be directly connected at this moment with D38. Our secondary target audiences are parents in surrounding districts, other district staff and their leadership, lawmakers, education influencers, news media personalities and personnel, and then choice out students and families. Zooming into some of our strategies, we're going to talk about messaging considerations, messages, and channels. We must consider our platform as we talk about the messaging that we're putting out there. We must also focus on language and more before we send any piece of communication out on behalf of the district. We venture into all kinds of different areas, including paid, earned, and owned, and we must consider the type of message, priority, level, and tone, time sensitivity, audience, and author. As we continue to dive into messaging here, we should tailor our message per audience and platform, and we should be weaving in these key messages. That D38 provides a world-class education. We serve every student every day. We are transparent, and we strive to be good stewards of public capital, which is trust, funding, etc. And we act in accordance with both policy and a long-range strategic plan. You'll notice a hashtag there at the end, world-class D38. We're hoping to launch that as a piece of our campaign moving into December. So we, at a high level, we're at we're not at a 30,000 foot view, maybe a 10,000 foot view. We have those earned, owned, and paid channels. This isn't an exhaustive list, as I mentioned, but zooming into some of our owned channels, we have our website, social media, our newsletter, and more. We utilize these to organically communicate with key audiences, and hopefully we're impacting some of those secondary audiences. Our earned is more in the realm of news releases, media opportunities, and op-eds that we send out there. We are going to deploy our media relations suite of tools to hopefully spread our messaging into additional areas, hopefully those secondary audiences, and increase our reach beyond just what we're doing organically. And then finally, our paid area is advertising, campaigns, placements, and more. These elevate the D38 message by guaranteeing people are seeing what we're putting out there, and they hit strategic groups to guarantee effective messaging. Some best practices as we move into the area of media relations and our organic communication are that we want to be proactive to drive the D38 message home. We want to engage productive relationships with members of the press, core, to ensure accurate reporting. We want to stay ahead of trends and stay out of stories that do not elevate our message. And then we want to make our people the heroes of our stories, keeping our stories simple and straightforward. Zooming in a little bit more on media relations, we want to make sure our story is straight and to the point. We want to use talking points, and some examples of our talking points are that we're accredited with distinction. We earn recognitions every single year, earning high placements for our schools and our district. We have 750 dedicated staff who we're striving to reward for their efforts. We offer a world-class education, and we serve every student every day. And then we're always working to get better. As I mentioned, we do want to keep that productive relationship with the press. It's not even last week. We utilized that relationship to make sure we were correcting an incorrect story about D38. Continuing on to our owned channels, we use these to strategically push our news and our stories to improve our position. We stay on top of the trends, like we mentioned in our last slide, and we create two-way communication with our stakeholders. We expand the different ways we are utilizing content across platforms and channels, and we're keeping our message on brand and to the point. It's not too dissimilar from what we were doing in the earned area. On our social platforms, we are planning our posts in advance. We are driving our audience to our website or to take specific actions. And then we're sharing and elevating content from our community partners and school accounts to ensure that there's collaboration and lots of people are involved. On our website, we are organizing our content according to how our users are utilizing the information. We are continuing to refresh and refine navigation and layouts, and then we are frequently consolidating content where possible. And then finally, in the best practices area for our advertising, we are going to utilize our small budget, about $30,000, to effectively tackle the areas of print, digital, and broadcast. As you might know, print and broadcast are a lot more expensive than digital. So in the future, and specifically moving into December, you'll see a little bit more of how we're going to navigate that mix. We attempt to be always on in our tactics, and that means that with our small budget, we want to make sure that we're always putting messaging out there and always supporting it with ad dollars to make sure that people aren't ever missing D38 and we don't ever go silent or go dark, so to speak. We want to ensure our message is being received by those who would not otherwise receive it, so often those are our secondary audiences. And then we want to venture into new areas and explore other opportunities, and one of those might be a print magazine. We need to measure our success, and one of those ways might be to monitor analytics and trends. So we're going to capture the data on our users and ensure we're growing our reach each year. We also want to monitor and capture what media coverage we're receiving to assess our efficacy. Additionally, we are certainly interested in deploying surveys to understand the perceptions of our district, and those would be an annual endeavor. That kind of wraps up the presentation on our strategy, and what we'll wind up doing is shifting into a priority 5 exercise. And what we're going to do is, for about 30 minutes, break into groups of 3. We're going to embark upon this exercise to deepen the appreciation and understand the who and the what, as we so often talk about the why and the how. We'll use a SWOT analysis protocol to tackle this exercise. As I mentioned, we talk about the why and the how in this presentation, and we're going to use the lens of the target audience as the vehicle to better assess how we're doing through a priority 5 lens and explore how to become more effective as individuals and as a district. So we'll break into those groups. I'm going to hand out a little...
Before we break into groups, could we have a little Q&A here?
Sure.
That would be great.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate the presentation and the approach. I wonder where you see this event, the board meetings, the work session, or regular meetings in terms of communications.
I think that's a great idea, or a great question and a great topic. It's something I look forward to each month. It's a pivotal connection to our community. I certainly enjoy hearing you all interface with our community, and I enjoy hearing how our community is feeling in the moment and what they share with us. I think they are key opportunities to share some of our news and some of our updates, and they're also a key way to help express and understand policy. So there's a couple different dynamics at play there. Work sessions, I think, are a really neat look into what we're doing and how we're operating, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity at play, maybe not necessarily with work sessions, but with our board and getting our community involved as a whole.
So a follow-up to bounce off of what you were saying, one of the things I appreciate since you've come on board is the emails you're sending out with a recap of our board meetings that go out to our internal stakeholders. And so my question with that is, if we have a community member that doesn't have any direct ties to our schools, and they want to be on an email list, how would they best go about getting communications from the district via email?
Absolutely. So we do have a few hundred community members who have signed up for our emails, and we have a protocol for that on our website. So we can make sure that we're pushing in our communications a little bit better on how community members can sign up. But there certainly are some who have signed up. So those board wrap-up communications that you mentioned, they go out to about 5,500 people, and we share them in a few other ways too. And as recently as October, they were being viewed by about 9,000 people each month. So.
I had a couple questions.
Please.
First question with respect to...
It's picking you up.
Enough of this. With respect to Mr. Taylor's question,
Sure.
Ms. Wood, every once in a while I'll ping you during a meeting to see how many people are physically attending live, and you're incredibly attentive in terms of giving me a pretty quick and very accurate answer. It's usually under 10, right? And then there's a certain number of people that will go back and watch a portion or all of it
Yep.
on recorded video online, correct? Do we have any feel for how many unique IP addresses do that?
A very small number, like you've mentioned. The live number is very low. I would put it around 6 people per meeting.
So we're 20 is a best case scenario?
I wouldn't have that number at my fingertips. Be happy to pull it for you. However,
That would be a liberal estimate?
Sure.
Okay. So my point in dragging us through the broken glass here, and apologies for doing that, is if in fact we determine that this medium is a wonderful way and place for us as a team to communicate with the public, we probably ought to think through a methodology to make sure we have hundreds, not tens, attending, and that we're able to measure what they get out of it.
Sure.
And if it's consistent with our objectives. And Dr. Summers, it looks like your cogs are churning, so anything.
I'm listening right now, but I have a lot I can share. I'm going to pause for the moment. You're doing great.
Okay. I always worry when that happens, team. Secondly, and this may be part of the SWOT analysis, so if it is, please let me know. I had a couple quick questions with respect to the website. So it looks like we had 1.4 million hits. I'm sorry, 1.7 million hits, and 1.4 were unique IP addresses.
Right.
Which means that about 300,000 out of 1.7 million were return customers, so to speak.
Spot
right?
on. Yep.
18%, something
Right.
like that, right?
Yep.
Where is that in the metric of what good looks like?
Sure. Sure. So we're benchmarking against ourselves. So what we need to focus on right now is our year-over-year analysis, and I'd be happy to provide that for you. There's not a repository of here's how each school performs. I'd be happy to poll some of my colleagues and see how they perform. But I would say when you have about let's rough average it at about 15,000 people who are either enrolled, work at, or have kids enrolled in the district, to have 300,000 people coming back is pretty good. It's pretty good. And within that 300,000, I'm sure it's a smaller number because those really engaged parents and families are visiting multiple pages. So they're visiting 10, 15, 30 a year as they look to see what classes they want their kids in, what sports teams, what clubs are out there, and potentially even what school they want to choice their kid into. So,
Thank you.
sure.
Last question. No, actually, let me take a half a step back. This was a great and comprehensive overview of what the team and we are all trying to do. So thank you and your team and whoever else helped with it. It focused, as you said, significantly on the how. And my question really relates to the what. And so here's the question now that I've teed it up. If we do this right, what do we get? What is our end desired outcome or state?
Absolutely. Our desired state is an open and transparent two-way communication channel where we're engaging our users, they're receiving our information, and it's improving how they feel and think and talk about D38. We'll understand if we're successful if we can see and measure the improved perceptions year over year. Hopefully that turns up in the polls when people have measures to vote on or board elections to participate in. Hopefully people are engaged, and hopefully we're seeing increased news coverage, and hopefully we're seeing our metrics continue to grow year after year. So it might be a long-winded answer, but hopefully I touched on the various areas that we're impacting.
Okay, thank you. That's good and comprehensive. Is there anything, Dr. Summers, that you would add to that?
I'm going to continue to pause for the moment because I think our exercise will help bring a little more light to this conversation. So without further ado, if we're ready for that.
Any other comments, questions? I had one more comment. My mother drilled into me in my youth that I had 2 ears and 1 mouth and to use them appropriately. And I finally figured out, well, Mom, I got 2 eyes. So how does that fit in, right? It's not as simple as what she was telling me, although I got her message. In this messaging that we're talking about here, how are we listening? I see a lot of broadcast, different channels of broadcasting, pushing out information. how do we listen? How do we as an organization, as a school system, listen and learn?
It's a really good question. I would say that's the two-way channel that we're growing, but we do have a email which people reach out to very frequently. We're often talking about those emails that come in from our community. We have board comments, which people bring their concerns, and we talk about those and how we should or shouldn't respond to those. We have me, and I am always watching and listening to what people are talking about D38 online. We employ a tool to help us monitor what people are saying about us, and even over break we were talking about, should we respond to this comment or not? So we're watching and we're listening. The other thing I would say is I've taken phone calls every day from parents who want to talk about our COVID protocols. They want to talk about our policies, and so I guess I would say we're continuing to grow that two-way communication, and it might not always be the front and center because we want to put our message out there and hopefully it generates the conversation, but we are certainly actively listening right now.
Well, again, going back to my mom, bless her heart, she used to tell me, why don't you listen to what I'm telling you instead of thinking about your reply? And it took me a long time to figure out what she was talking about. She really wanted me to understand her. She didn't want me to reply to her because she knew what I was going to say, frankly. So when I talk about listening and learning, learning is not response or reply. That's the key I'm trying to focus on, is how do we listen and learn, not just reply. Now, there's an element of learning in the reply process. I get that. But I hope you appreciate, I'm trying to raise this to a newer level of communication, if we could, of really learning from our students. I loved 2 months ago when we had a young man talk about mental health. I learned a lot that night. And that's impacted me. That's changed me. That to me is communication. And that's what I'm trying to highlight here.
Thank you. All right, so we'll break into this exercise unless anybody has anything else. I'm going to hand out a one sheet for y'all. So we'll break into those three groups as I mentioned. We've already kind of pre-assigned to save time.
Which table? I'll follow you.
That's exactly what I did.
All right, group B will go here, and group C will go there, group A will go there. Ron, you're with me.
What'd you do, lose the raffle?
I think I won.
He drew the short stick.
Mark, do you want us to just dive in, or do you want to go through it real quick to make sure everyone knows what you're looking
I have to read through it a little bit more.
Just so we're setting the table for everybody.
Yeah. So as we get set up, our goal here is to deepen our shared understanding of how our stakeholders or our target audiences that we went through currently perceive our district. So we're going to zoom in a little bit on that with our conduit to the public, which is our board members. We're going to use this understanding that we generate here to strengthen our approach in communication with all members of the C38 community. And we're going to use the information and insight gleaned to inform our strategic communication efforts. So we'll take about 30 minutes of team process here. I'm going to be a little bit of a timekeeper because we'll take the first 15 minutes to focus on your first audience. So group A is focusing on students, B is focusing on parents, and group C is focusing on staff. After about 15 minutes, we'll transition to each group focusing on the broader community. Any questions?
Make sure you keep us on time.
You got it.
Okay.
All right.
to strategic. This is not. Oh, that would be. So our audience was students, and quite honestly, it took us 2 or 3 minutes to actually get in the booth and see this because it's been a while. But I think that the strengths we came up with were sense of communities that our students have, sense of pride, especially at various school sites, but across the district. The quality of education and the opportunities that we think that they recognize, both within their school sites and day-to-day living, but also given the rewards and recognitions that the district has received as a whole. And then the sense of leaving the district with a well-rounded education in terms of arts and athletics and as well as academics, because there's those opportunities are there as well. Do you want to talk about the next?
So for weaknesses, because we're such a high-performing school district, that puts additional pressure on students. So we recognize that that could be a weakness from a student's perspective, that there's a lot of pressure for them to be very successful and meet those high standards. Also, we felt it was a weakness that maybe students don't understand all the individualized options that they have, the so-called pathways to success, that college is not the only way forward. I'll go ahead and move into the threats that we recognized, and maybe Amber can follow up with the opportunities. So one of the threats we thought students might perceive, or from a student's perception, they may see and witness distrust among the adults in the system and in the system itself. They're always listening and they hear us talking, and they hear that dissension among their leaders and the adults in their lives. They may also be comparing themselves to peers outside of the district and wondering why they don't have some of the opportunities that might be available to students that we don't necessarily have in our district.
Is there room for questions in this? Yes. Okay. I'm good. We talk, and by the way, we have this in our group too, so we talk about being a high performing district. Can someone please define exactly what that means?
Who wants to take a step?
We talked a lot about back to the academics and arts and athletics, that the district has been recognized in many ways, and it's not unusual for us to be the top performers when it comes to all areas of competition.
We talked about the student perception when you have a Becker Scholar, or when you hear a peer going to, you know, a top-tier university or something like that. That does elevate their perception of the school district. So it's not that we're honing in on data per se, but just coming from a student perspective. And you know, there's logos around and there's banners up and recognition opportunities at the school site, especially secondary, where I think that is communicated out to them.
So here's the so what behind my question. We're talking about communication. We're looking for ways to enhance the absorption of various constituencies in our community. Right? Let's illustrate what performance means in areas that are valued to those constituents as we form our constituencies.
So what's an example of that, Ron? Because I'm curious.
Yeah,
Are you saying we're doing that, we're not doing that?
I don't know, but we need to know if we're doing it, if it's working, and if we're not doing it, we should do it and measure it. I'll give you 3 or 4 examples if you like. So Tracy brought up a great one, the Ivy League class of the university. We're a high-performing district, and one of the metrics is sending kids or having kids qualify for those schools and be accepted. Then the constituency likely of parents and adults in my constituency over 50 without kids in the district, that might very well be valued. Okay? And so the question is, by constituency, we're going to shape our messaging, who are the top 3 care of us, and what are we doing to connect to them? And I happen to hone in on high performing because it was the first thing we thought about. It's what we talk about, and we never define it. And if we don't define it, it becomes hyperbole, right? It becomes rhetoric, which has no impact. We're all about impact and absorption that generates action, right? So don't want to hijack the meeting, but that was what was behind my thing because I struggle with it. So, exactly.
Yeah, and that's what we identified as the opportunity is while we may be quote unquote high performing, we may not necessarily be focused on a holistic approach for every student. So we noted that. We also thought it would be important to learn from the students about what they most value in the programming that we offer, because we know we do have many students or their families choosing to go to other school districts. And so we thought an opportunity might be learning about what programs and opportunities are most valued by the students themselves. And then reinforcing and substantiating a sense of confidence and pride with student voice versus parents potentially communicating the high standards and the expectations, but reinforcing that sense of confidence and pride with the students themselves.
Yeah, why don't we do that? That's a good point. Why don't we do that together? Great. I'm sure there'll be some overlap. Okay.
Thank you. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to put this up here and let you two kind of tee it off. So, this one.
So our group had the parents, we talked a little bit about the strengths in communication, in engagement, the support that we do have, the feedback that Mark has received in communications regarding what are we doing well, and one of those items had to do with safety, the vestibules, as well as the SRO relationships in the school, and that our graduates are competitive. So very similar to the first group, that we are known for our student success, whatever way that shows itself, whether it's academics, athletics, we are known for success. So those are some of our strengths. When we took a look at the weakness, we discussed a little bit about staffing and the implications that has in a world-class education. And then what is our feedback loop? So, we do, similar to what Mr. Taylor was saying about what are we listening, how are we gaining that feedback, and then what do we do with it? So I'm going to pass it.
Sure. Did we mention the lens we're looking at this through? Okay. Yeah, it's parents of existing students in the district versus those that have already made their way out. So the opportunity is to really define, when we say world class, we should define what that means and why it's worth investing in. And to espouse the continuous improvement things that we're doing and can just continue to refine it as time goes on and things around us change and we adapt, or we try to change ahead of it and skate to where the puck's going to be instead of where it's been, for example. And the other thing that's an opportunity for us is to highlight what are we doing for the kids that aren't going to Harvard or Stanford, and the kids that are going to become the next cybersecurity expert and make more than the kids out of Harvard and Stanford do their first year. Okay? Which is attractive to a lot of people, right? And the world has changed around us to where these alternative pathways are very, very viable. And then the threats are lack of support from this particular constituency of parents. And I use the term people voting with their feet, right, or choicing out. And the other threat is people just truly not knowing because they've got their head down and they're working hard, or COVID has their equilibrium off, or some other things are happening around them and they choose not to engage in their kids' education. Questions or thoughts?
The fact that families are under attack in our society. I mean, there's so many single parent families, or divorce has a big impact on, and we have to acknowledge it and recognize it for what it is.
So how would we put that up there? I think that's very valid. Would it be family evolutions, change in family unit? Just family trauma? Yeah, that's good.
I could also see a strength of, in this community in particular, that our parents do care about their kids' education, that we come from our community is a more highly educated community, and so we value the education. And I think from a parent's perspective, that's why folks move here, is for the quality of education that their students will receive. So I see that as a strength as well.
I think that was almost our top one. We put engagement down, and we kind of nested what you said right within there, so thank you. All right, kind of transitioning on here, we've got staff.
Okay, so not to minimize any particular quadrant, but I'm just going to highlight a few talkabouts in our breakout. So from a strengths perspective, and I should add, when we thought about our staff and the continuum of our staff, it was important to think about it in terms of there's different groups that are represented, so it's a little bit challenging. Much like what you guys went through too, in terms of individual versus collective students, parents, et cetera. But we thought engagement, just in regards to, there is a recognition and a celebration of strong staff. There's strong parent partnerships and family support, by and large. Great kids, which also represents great families. By and large, feeling supported at the building level. Our staff have a tremendous passion for education. They also do a great job of looking at different ways to take care of each other. And we talked about relationships, again, just summarizing all of that. So oftentimes you'll just hear about people valuing the fact that it feels like a family within their respective work environment. From a weakness perspective, and we kind of took an initial approach of thinking about what more needs to be done from the listening angle, or to achieve an authentic understanding, meaning, does the district really listen? Does it have an authentic understanding of what we're going through? Coupled with that, we hear often that there are community voices, and I put in parentheses, loud community voices, that may create a dynamic where those voices are listened to more than staff voices. Compensation, obviously, and parity in compensation. And then we talked a little bit about history, which we went into more detail with our broader community audience as well, just the history of where we've been most recently, and as a function of many initiatives that have not passed. Opportunities, or I'll go to threats and then opportunities. Threats, turnover is a big one. The overall narrative right now on public education, and then we went even more specific and just called out teachers, or some of our teachers, feeling like they are under attack. At times, there's a notion that the feelings or the perceptions as a result of those feelings may be more of a driver than actual facts. And we talked about both those external voices that may be outside the system, but also that there may be moments where there's internal strife, or not necessarily a feeling of we're all working together toward the same ideal. An opportunity is to, and I think Ms. Upchurch made this point, that they're craving, a lot of our staff are craving to see and hear us, and I think by us specifically that was board. So just wanting to be seen or more heard. Yes, there's an appreciation through the efforts around compensation, but we also know that it's a real delicate balance. And then we talked a little bit more about healing. And underneath that says accessibility. So we were kind of coming back to the presence factor and recognizing that a lot of our staff are feeling somewhat traumatized. So what are the steps that we can work toward healing in that process? Anything I missed?
The only thing I would add is, with all these quadrants present opportunity to be better, and opportunity to hear and listen, and opportunity for support, to build on our strengths and acknowledge our weaknesses and build on that. So we saw that as there's a lot of opportunity there.
So, quick question on accessibility. And I assume a lot of this feedback came from the discussion/listening sessions that were in all the buildings in the last few weeks, right? So it's
to some extent,
it's really fresh, which is valuable as heck. What do we think accessibility means in the eyes of the staff? What does that look like if we do it well?
So I think it means going to them and listening, being accessible, going to the buildings, being there at lunchtime, being there before school, where we go to celebrations and we go to games, but the day in and the day out of seeing life through the eyes of an educator, living in their shoes and looking through their eyes.
I don't want to miss the opportunity to still go through these. If you want to, can we do maybe a rapid fire share out? Sure. And maybe we can set the stage through this share out, and then anything else that can be added, because I don't want to miss that. And our other topics, I think, will go pretty expeditiously. Okay, so broader community. Again, I'll try to summarize quickly here. So from a strengths perspective, we talked about the term was board congruence. Some examples, a very strong focus on our students, on the education that we provide, on an effective governance team. We talked about team at length, both in terms of our board dynamic as well as our district leadership team. talked about our collective talents, having the right people in the right places. Obviously, our people across the board, great teachers, students, families. We live in a great community, our location, the strength of our community. We could go on and on. We talked a little bit about that history, and then from a legacy perspective, you hear often when talking in the community about everything from a superintendent buyout from 15 plus years ago and different short tenures to when we were presented with a tsunami of growth perspective and how that translated, everything from the PRHS vote, multiple issues denied, not having a long-range plan. Our arrow offshooting from all of this was that at some level trust has been compromised. Again, coming back to this notion of who's telling the story, at times the other perspective, meaning that there may be, again, that attack, not just on public education, but on specifically the district. We talked a little bit about that win-lose mentality, specifically with our charter relationship. And while that is something that we've been working on and has improved, there's still history that weighs in. Perceptions or misperceptions as far as how, again, either the feelings or the experiences that people had that play into either these issues or other issues, that ultimately just translates to a lack of general support or interest in a strong school system. Recognizing that there are also national and political narratives at play in that space. And there's also things that we just don't have complete control over. From an opportunity lens, I'll come back to presence and accessibility. That's something obviously we hit on through that last Shareout. Leveraging the strong governance team, as well as a continuation and execution of our strategic plan. It's great that we have these pillars or these priorities that we've focused on, and so staying the course in that effort. Extending our community engagement opportunities, both as a celebration of our district, but as also an extension of our entire community. We talked about a rekindling of what we were doing pre-COVID. For example, there were both listening and learning tours, as well as a community engagement tour. And how can we resurrect that or rekindle that? So that was something that we kind of left on. Anything else that I didn't touch on?
Reaching our community members that are further out east that don't have students in the system anymore. And so mailers that we did, for example, was an excellent way to reach each and every member in our community that aren't in our buildings, but still care, and they're still our stakeholders and they're our taxpayers. So hearing from them and them hearing from us is a good way of engaging them.
I think we also talked about partnerships, community partnerships, through a number of our different current relationships and continuing to extend those as well. Town of Monument, Kiwanis, Tri-Lakes Cares, et cetera, et cetera.
That's a pretty high level. Ron, do you want to walk us through?
In the spirit of time, if you're okay with us, everything we had, you guys covered, with one exception, and that is in the bottom left. And so I'll just highlight that, and then we'll move on, unless you guys have a question, okay? And that is, this constituency does a really good job of connecting the youth to the health of our country. And they really are laser focused on what that means and the value of it. And so it creates an opportunity for us to do a wonderful job in preparing those youth to maintain and grow our national values.
We had that as well, just how strongly they value the younger generation. was under our strengths as well. So I think that would be something. And then the only thing, and
We knew you had it. We copied it from you.
was there anything else you wanted to point out about yours? Okay, and I think the only other thing I just wanted to dovetail off of what Casey said about community events, and the way that we talked about them was sort of those, or the way I guess I was thinking, was the interface events, or the places where the district, where there's a confluence between that and what's going on with the community, whether it's originating from D38 or originating from the community, anytime we can leverage those connections in a positive way. So that could be even the board meeting presentations, bringing in first responders and other community members. That could be us having a presence at the 4th of July parade or any of those other events. So thinking along the same lines, but I just wanted to articulate it slightly differently. Was there anything else either of you want to add? Otherwise, I think we overlap.
Well, I just want to say thank you. This has been insightful, and I appreciate hearing all of what you bring to the different audiences. I know we all could have spoken to all the audiences, but can't wait to take this, learn from it, and continue to listen. So I think that kind of concludes this exercise, and I appreciate the extra time to do so. So anything you'd like to say to wrap up, Dr. Summers?
Yeah, just time well spent. I think clearly bridging good thinking into good action. And when we started this from the notion of our strategic communications plan, and then thinking about the intersection of that plan with our strategic plan, if you could make an argument, you could probably do it with any of the priorities, that priority 5 lives in everything that we do from a communications angle. So what I'm excited about, and we're going to spend a little bit of time, I think, in my update as well, trying to bridge a little bit more to, so what's next, and how do we actually put this into, again, some really good action. So I appreciate all the good thinking and interaction, and thanks for allowing us the work session time that we've been using in this way to further this along. And with that, I think we'll maneuver back. Thanks, Mark.
Just so you know. Our next agenda item is B2, Mill Levy Certification Preliminary Review. Kitty Overton will provide this presentation to us today.
Okay, good morning. You have 2 documents in your board packet related to mill levy certification. The first is a summary from the Colorado Department of Education regarding the mill levy correction. This is legislation that was signed in June that requires school districts who have debruced to lower their temporary tax credit down to 0 over a period of time, not to exceed 1 mil per year. So as we start to look at the calculation for this year's mill levy, you'll see that we've moved the mill levy from 23.164 to 24 to comply with that new regulation. The other components of the mill levy for 21-22 are sort of backed out based on our assessed value of $696 million. So the mill levy override amount, this percentage, this mill is calculated based on generating $4 million based on an assessed value of $696 million. Likewise with the bond, this represents our current obligation for the coming year, and these are the mills needed to secure that funding for bond repayment. Abatement is held at 0.111, and the total mills for the year then come to 39.448. Are there any questions in particular?
So if the net assessed value is just under 700 million, do we have any idea how many structures that represents?
I probably have it in this document.
Don't
if you'd
burn
like to look
board
through
time.
it.
Yeah, we'll do it later.
Absolutely.
I'm just trying to get an average.
Yeah, the assessor's office sends out a fairly detailed
Okay,
listing.
we'll take it offline. Thanks.
I have a question. During this weekend's Casby convention, the Colorado Department of Education has said they'd meet with any school district that wants to know what the impact of the SB 1164 is. Can you give me a layman's term or layman's explanation of how exactly does that impact D38? I mean, I can see how we have to increase it, but what does that mean to the average taxpayer?
You look like you're ready to talk, Dr. Summers. I don't want to.
I'll do my best. What it means to the average taxpayer in D38 is as the assessed valuation increases, the rate of our total mill as composed by our general fund PPR allocation, which we know is the local share at the state level, will increase by 1 up to 27 over the course of the next 3 to 4 years. What that means then comprehensively is as our bond repayment continues to lower over time, and assuming our current mill status, that you're still going to see an overall decline like you're seeing from 41 to 39 this year. We would anticipate that over the next 3 to 4 years to continue to decline overall. What that means is a function of how much assessed valuation or how much your house is worth it's variable. But in terms of the local share component that's going to the state, that will increase as it relates to taxpayer equity across the state. So it means that it should level itself out over a series of years, even though it's going to take some districts a lot more time than it will take us.
But that's shared across the state, correct?
Correct. So then what does that mean in terms of how that impacts our bottom line at the district level? Well, it's a little too soon to know until the new budget is going to be approved for this upcoming school year. It means the local share will increase and likely the state share will still decrease.
Of course.
More than likely.
And then does that, with the total mills, does that include any MLOs that a district has passed or bond mills, or is that?
That's separate.
Separate,
So the
okay.
local mill levy override would be apart from any increase that we're seeing in that total
Okay,
local share for the state fund.
thank you.
Just to piggyback on that, from a cash flow perspective, you said in the long term it'll balance itself out. In the short term, is the cash flow change significant or insignificant? Is it less? Is it 0.5% or less?
I guess it depends on your definition of significant
Okay,
or insignificant.
0.5% is 500,000. Is it under 500?
Is our cash flow going to change as a result of this? Not really.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Am I
If
missing
you're,
anything
you're
on
talking
that?
about cash flow for the district, not the individual taxpayer.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, there's literally no change. It's just the funding comes or a larger portion comes from the local community rather than the state.
It's the source, not the
Correct.
dollars.
Correct.
Thank you.
You've got a year-over-year analysis. Last year when we looked at this, I think we have like a 10-year spreadsheet.
Okay.
And if you
yes.
could update that, that would be
Sure.
helpful.
Yeah, I think I came across that actually last evening.
Perfect.
I can update that and get that out to you guys.
And if I could, just as a request, actually ask you to forecast that out a couple more years. And the reason I would like to see that is because one of our bonds pays off in 24, 25, I think. And that will have an impact. And I'd like to see, let's look at this, not just where we're at this year, but where we've been and where are we going. That's one point. The second point I wanted to make is the MLO, the $4 million from 1999, you're forecasting to be 5.743 mils this go-round, which has been reducing year over year because of the growth of assessed values over time. However, there is another aspect of that I'd like to have us focus on, and that is the percentage of that goes to the charter versus the percentage that stays in the district is changing as well. And I'd like to see that trend included in that longer range look back and forward looking. Does that make sense?
Sure does.
So, not to create make work, so no is a very acceptable answer here. The bonds we refinanced a year ago, I think those expire or will be completed in terms of payment in 2028, will they not? Do I remember that correctly?
I had that written down, but I don't.
It's close,
28,
right?
29.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is it worth looking at that? Just because it's
That should be part of the projection that you're asking
exactly
for.
my
so,
point.
Yeah,
Because it cumulatively is a significant amount, right?
right.
Okay. And then, because Mr. Taylor's point about projected cash flow is pretty valuable, right?
Anything else on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next agenda item is B3, policy update. Dr. Summers and our district administrators want to introduce a systemic approach for addressing policy updates.
So this month, we are introducing 2 revised policies. And what you have is an updated policy matrix of all of the revisions that have been made to date or proposed up to date. The 2 under review for first reading later this month, December, is going to be JFBA and JFBB. Those are choice open enrollment proposed revisions. Without going into all those details right now, what I can share with you, and these are in your exact content currently, but we'll move them into public content as we shift into preparation for December 13th. I just wanted to let you know these policies are unique in that we did a very comprehensive review and we have a key that's associated. So if you open up one of those documents, we put that key in terms of the colored lettering. So you have black, which is our current Casby and LPSD policy that's identical. The blue is currently in our policy, but not in Casby's, but would remain in our proposal. The pink are the Casby recommendations, because that was part of the thrust to review and revise. And then the red are LPSD recommendations not currently in Casby. So what I can share with you just at a high level there is we're about to embark on the first choice enrollment part of the school year headed into January 3rd. We don't see these policies necessarily changing anything for the upcoming initial choice enrollment window. However, the main change that we're proposing that's unique to the district, not necessarily from Casby, is that we categorize our choice enrollment in 2 rounds. So the first round enrollment would be like the first 4 to 6 weeks at the beginning of the school year. So that's the typical time where we see a lot of choice enrollment coming in. And then following that window, we would engage in round 2 of choice enrollment, which would extend from essentially mid-February all the way through end of September, year over year. It's just a different way to think about how we're bringing in choice enrollment based on space available and on other criteria that you'll see established within the policy as a whole. We're happy to go into this in more detail at the December meeting, but I just wanted to tee that up because it's quite meaty, and there's a lot involved with making sure that all those changes are consistent with Casby as well as consistent with how we want to operationalize.
So 2 questions. One is, our first reading will be on the December board meeting.
That's correct.
And what is the purple again? Did you mention the purple?
It's purple pink. That is
Magenta.
That is.
Magenta.
I think Rick used another term like fuchsia or something.
Yeah.
Chartreuse. Anyway, those are the Casby recommendations that are not currently in our LPSD policy.
Oh, I thought that was, what was the blue again?
Those are currently in LPSD policy, not in Casby. And we put both of those keys at the bottom of the draft policy just to keep all that straight.
And then the red is district.
Yes, those are
Recommendation.
our district recommendations.
Can I ask one question?
Of course.
Why is Casby making recommendations on these policies?
So you had a bill that was introduced around specifically military
That's right.
children, so that's the big section there. And then there's also some additional language. Upon review of our policy, some of our language was redundant, so we leaned on Casby's version of that language. In other cases, we retained our preferred language. So it's kind of a mixed bag, which is why we wanted to keep track of all of it in those colors.
The matrix that you have, again, is for those that we've addressed so far, correct?
That's correct.
So is it possible that we could just expand that to have all the board policies included, and even if they're pending, right, they're just, the reason being is I'm going to kind of fall back on this whole concept of communication. If there's any one thing that the board has greater responsibility for than board policy, it's the hiring of the superintendent. So this is, as far as I'm concerned, our highest priority. And when we talk about communications, I would like to actually engage in communications around board policy in the community and get their involvement in it. And the process that we've used in my 4 years here doesn't do that. So I would really like to see us somehow, some way, have board policy more of a community engagement, because that is what governs this school system. And if the community stakeholders want a voice, the best way they can implement or impact change is through board policy. Just a thought.
I think we can certainly add. It'll be a bit meaty, but I wonder if there's a way to organize that. I'm going to lean on Vicki for help there. So why don't we work on that and see what we can provide for you?
Well, similar to the priorities, we've tried to align them
Sure.
with priorities.
Sure.
That would be one way to consider it.
Sure. Anything else on that?
Anything else? Let's move then to the next agenda item, B4, introduction of the 2022/23 and 23/24 school district calendars. Member Wetstein?
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Sure how to pull those up. Okay. So as you saw in your board packet, we are introducing calendars for the upcoming 2 school years. We did model these calendars after our current and most recent year's calendar, so they have similar student contact days as well as similar teacher contact days. I do want to provide a shout out to Miss Alicia Welch, who brought several of us together to review these calendars. She also did some research to see how we compared with surrounding districts.
Awesome.
And we included our human resources team, as well as Mr. Jim Taylor did some work to help us organize these as well. You will notice one change that we are in alignment with our staff calendars moving forward and the compensation structure. We've changed to include July as the first month of the year. So we're aligning our school family calendars with our fiscal year calendars. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about these. One suggestion that I've had is when we move these to the December agenda, I would propose that we formally, I would ask that you formally approve the upcoming 22-23 school calendar and then preliminarily approve the following year, so that if there are minor adjustments that we would want to make, we would bring those back to you again this time next school year with the 23-24 again for final approval, and then the following year. So we would continue on a 2-year cycle.
Amber, I have one suggestion. So on our regular board meeting, would you lay out, even if it's on one slide, a process overview of, you just described it,
Sure.
but I'd love to see that part of the documented history of this so that people understand the process that you undertook and everyone involved to get here.
It'd be my pleasure.
So 2 quick ones. One is that's a great example of communicating what world-class looks like, right? Versus just throwing it together based on what we think is the right thing to do. And secondly, can you just very, very succinctly and briefly outline if there are any significant changes versus the current school year in this proposed calendar?
There is one date to note. Just because of the way the calendar dates fall out, you'll notice that August 9th, which is a Tuesday, will be the first day of school for students. In the past few years, it's been Wednesday, but again, the student contact days are the same. It's just the way the holidays fell out that was an adjustment that we made. There's also an area on the following year's calendar where it's a leap year, and so there was an adjustment made for that as well. And I could speak more clearly to what that date was. It doesn't affect students, it would only affect staff. Essentially, staff are on a 261-day contract, and there are 262 days in the work days in the year, so there's a day to be accounted for there.
So the numbers and equations from September to May are indicating staff.
So you'll see
Days.
on each calendar, we noted the total student contact days for elementary, middle, and high, and then the teacher contract days, and those are all similar to or the same as they have been in the past.
Okay, so October 2022, this is just new to me because I haven't seen this work this way. By the time you're finished with October 2022, the student will have, if in attendance every day, would have had 58 contact days. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay.
Okay, hold on.
How about snow days? How many was the team thinking?
So we are required by law to have 160 contact days in school, and you can see that at the elementary level, there are 163 scheduled days. My understanding is that in past school years, Dr. Summers has been able to request a waiver when needed that allows us to go beneath those required contact days.
Two pieces to that. The state is actually more interested in the minimum required hours as opposed to the number of days. So that's why you have so many districts that are on like a 4-day-a-week schedule, still able to meet the state's threshold. That said, if as we're counting those hours, we find ourselves coming precariously close to that limit, then we are able to submit a waiver. On average, we've been calling 9 to 10 days over the course of the last 3 to 4 years. And this year, because that's not wood, we haven't had a count one yet. So we're working with some cushion that we haven't had previously. But I think the days factor works out well because of the way the bell schedules and hours total up.
Thanks.
And I'm just curious, because everything's laid out with such detail, what are the orange other days of note? I know they may all differ, but can you give me a for instance? I have a feeling parents will want to know.
So November 3rd, for example, is the end of the elementary trimester, and those are noted by each month.
To the right.
So they are academic.
Well, they're mixed.
Oh, I
October
see.
12th,
Conference.
It's a catch-all.
It's a
is
mix.
the conference night. So we do spell
Okay.
that out.
I see that.
with-
Okay, I didn't see that
with
initially.
each
Thank you.
month.
I have two comments. I appreciate that when Mrs. Welsh came together and staff came together and looked at this, for example, the PLC days, that was still found to be the most valuable time slot to do those on Wednesdays in the mornings. So I appreciate that that was thought through from a building staff perspective as well. I have another question, though. I've often noticed that we do our spring break in March, and then other school districts around the nation, everybody kind of does it differently. But for example, on the East Coast, we always had spring break centered around that Easter time frame, so that it gave for travel and so on and so forth. Is there a reason that we always choose to do it where we do it?
I know from working on calendars for the past several years that there has been an agreement across the Pikes Peak region to keep spring break similar because so many teachers work and live in different communities across the region, and so to honor our staff to be able to take that same break as their children is one reason that the districts in the Pike Peak region have chosen to be similar on their calendars.
Huh. I learned something new. Thanks.
Any other comments or suggestions? Thank you, Amber.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The next agenda item is B5, our superintendent's update.
So I'm going to keep this brief, but hopefully comprehensive. The first note or item of note would be our COVID numbers update, which I think Vicky's pulling up and is also in the packet. So these were effective as of the Friday before Thanksgiving break. Any questions related to numbers or any other protocol conversation COVID related? Okay, moving along then. I have some really good news that is hot off the press. And we just learned yesterday that we are being recommended for the approval of the Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant. So new acronym for us, CLSD. So this was an application that was submitted through the efforts of our Learning Services Coordinator, Pam Kern, as well as Amber and her team. And this falls under literacy improvement efforts aligned to Priority 2. So there are some additional revisions that are being requested to our application, but all that said, we believe will be funded fully for our requested amount of $741,000 over the next 3 years to support these efforts. So that is a huge kudos and congratulations, and will definitely help further our coordinated efforts regarding literacy support throughout the district. So we're looking forward to more of what that entails and sharing more updates in that effort as we go forward. And then the last thing, and this was something that was an extension of an agenda planning session that both Mr. Taylor, Ms. Upchurch, and I had the week before Thanksgiving, as well as, I would say, an extension of what we just went through together here through our Priority 5 work. So we're wanting to go a step further in thinking about what our work sessions will look like going into the second part of the year. We've done, as you know, a deep dive of each of our priorities through each of our monthly work sessions. And I'm just going to share a couple of thoughts, and then, Chris, if there's anything else you'd like to add. I think we are hoping to, number one, see an opportunity for the board to be more present or accessible at our school sites, and through a schedule that can afford you all more of the same things that we were talking about earlier, the chance to see and listen and hear from our kids, our staff, our parents, and broader community. So we're brainstorming some ways to do that. Our current work session calendar, just to remind you, and we approved this back in our November meeting, but our very first date was scheduled for January 4th, and I think that might have been a little bit of a misstep on my part. That is the first day back for all kids, and staff. We'll be back on the 3rd, but nonetheless, the 4th will be a little bit busy. So I think one of our thoughts was, is there a way to maybe repurpose that meeting and through that conversation look at an extension into other ways to repurpose our work session time together. So while that is not fully developed right now in terms of a schedule, I think it's an opportunity that we have in front of us to really put our collective thoughts together and perhaps create a model for what engagement or empowerment can look like with the community going into the second part of the year. Chris, anything else you'd like to add to that, or?
Well, just to make this an open question for all of us. We've been using the first Tuesday of every month, generally, for our work sessions, 8 a.m. And how flexible would we be to modify that calendar based on each individual school site's regularly scheduled PTOs back, etc., so that there's not additional burden at the site, but it would require us to be more flexible. That's really kind of the bottom line question that we should be thinking about.
So I guess I'd have to know specifics in order to schedule out. Are you proposing that instead of the 4th at 8 a.m. meeting here, that we'll be at a school site that day, possibly at a different time of day?
Possibly a different time as well, right? And a different day, not necessarily the first Tuesday. It depends on
the
site.
two sides of the equation are, number one, what can the board accommodate? Number two, what can we do to be or make sure that the time that we have at our school sites is meaningful, not disruptive, all those components. So I have focused less on the school part of that up to this point. I think to bring more light to that, to your point, Ms. Phillips, we'd have to start putting pen to paper and say, is this going to work, and how does this, not only the day and the time, but then also thinking about the format, because if we're keeping these as work session-like meetings, the difference is going to be as shaped by district leadership team. It's going to be more shaped by how we can engage with that particular school community on a number of different aspects of what they'd like to share with us.
And then I guess my next question would go to 8 school sites and 5 months. So that would...
Well, just over the course of all year. I mean, once we make the
move it into the
transition, we'll
fall.
just continue it.
Okay.
So that
you're
could be
not trying to
feedback
do
for,
that
yeah,
from
that
the
is
end of
bold.
the year. Okay.
That is bold. And I would probably go a step further to say May is not a great month with all the end of year activities.
Right.
So if we're focused on doing every school site within a 4-month span of time, January through April, that might be too ambitious. Perhaps we just start with 4 and then roll those next 4 into the following school year, to Mr. Taylor's point.
Yeah, and or, basically there's 12 months in the year. I think, is it July we don't have meetings?
June and July, correct.
Yeah, so we have, let's say 10 months, right? So maybe 2 times during those 10 months we meet here. And the other 8 times we're at a particular site. So let's look at it not to the constraint of June of this year, but like the 2-year calendar. What is,
Yeah, no,
because
that's
we're really
helpful.
looking at it more of a paradigm shift rather than a temporary change.
Okay.
So what I shared was that I think that there's a lot of value in going to our buildings and engaging our community in our buildings. I think it gives an opportunity for the surrounding community in that local school to be in the school and have a part of that school, be a part of the process in board meetings and in the school. Some logistics to keep in mind are some of our schools have their backs and their PTO meetings in the middle of the school day. For example, Lewis Palmer Middle School, their meeting is in a pretty small room. So making sure that logistically that we can still accommodate and not be disruptive. Kilmer's is usually in the mornings. So being flexible of sometimes it may be in the evening, sometimes it's going to be in the morning, sometimes it's going to be in the middle of the day. Making sure we're not disruptive to the learning process of the students, making sure we're easily accessible. One of the things I've appreciated about our work sessions since COVID, one of those COVID silver linings is we now record our work sessions. And so that gives a little bit more accessibility to those that aren't sitting here, but are having an opportunity to learn. And our work sessions have focused on moving forward towards our regular board meetings. And so there's a lot of discussion and process that goes into once we get to the board meetings, the decisions, we already have had that discussion. So making sure that our work sessions are still work focused also as we transition into the second meeting of each month.
Yeah, I don't think we're ready to make a proposal today. I think the purpose of today's conversation is really to consider this paradigm shift. And we don't have enough detail right now to make a decision. I really just want us to consider how flexible as individuals we can be, and we can't even address that till we get some idea from each of the school sites, because I think, as Tiffany just noted, one school's going to be different than another. And so we have to see what their capability is to host that. And I'd like to start there because that's where the issue lies. And then we can determine how flexible we are to whatever that means. So I would suggest that this is a January work session item, that we look at it in some detail for a paradigm shift, not just for 4 months, but how would this work? Is that enough time, Dr. Summers, do you believe, to talk to all of the sites?
I think that gives us ample time to communicate with our schools and have some more tangible logistical plans. My only request would be, is it possible for us to move from January 4th to January 11th in light of that first day of school, everything going on?
Yes, for me.
It works for me.
It works great. I won't be there, but it works great.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz.
I actually have one other thing about the entire paradigm shift idea. It's brilliant. Anytime we're all about the students and the staff in creating successful outcomes for our kids and our graduates. Anytime we can be deeper engaged in that part of our business, it's a win for everybody. And this is what innovation is all about. And kudos to whoever said, let's do it different this time. Okay?
It was a shared exercise, but we appreciate that feedback.
Yeah.
That was the reason for our pause earlier.
Innovation is what will keep us world class and have us be the envy of everybody else and be competitive.
Ms. Upchurch, does that work for
The
you?
11th works for me as well,
Okay.
yes. And this goes back to what we were saying earlier during our exercise of us being more accessible and going to our buildings and being a part of our buildings and hearing our staff within the buildings, walking in their shoes.
Based on their schedule, not ours, right?
Correct.
That's the key here.
Yep.
We're going to try and be flexible to meet their needs.
We will serve them.
Right.
Thank you all for that. Thank you.
Did you have anything else?
No, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Summers. I don't think I've said this lately, but do you know how much we appreciate you?
Thank you for sharing that again. The feeling's mutual.
We really do appreciate you. So with the next agenda item is B6, board member comments. And Ron, if you don't mind, we'll start with you and just work this way.
Sure, just very briefly. It is really hard. Communications is probably the toughest one of our 5 core strategic elements because we have to impact an audience that's hard to get to, hard to measure, and hard to change. And we don't necessarily want to change the way we/they think, but we at least want to make sure our messages are absorbed and allow them to make an educated decision. It's really hard to do, okay? So kudos to the team for diving in and digging in and figuring out a way to measure what we're doing. Secondly, I think this is one of our last, do we have a meeting next month? We do, right?
December 13th.
Okay. Then I'll save the balance.
Thank you, Ron.
I have 2 brief things. I don't know who all is going to the Colorado Association of School Boards annual conference that starts Thursday, and then Friday and Saturday, but there's a lot of valuable breakouts and a lot of valuable keynotes, and I'm personally looking forward to the growth that comes out of that. So I hope to see everybody there. And then briefly, I wasn't able to get to all of them, but I attended several of the presentations that Dr. Summers and his staff shared with our various buildings and listened to our staff. And I attended the Building Better Colorado meeting here. And I was fortunate enough to sit at my table had several staff members as well. And I would just encourage each of our board members to not wait until we decide on how our work sessions would look like, but to reach out to our building principals and be in the buildings and be present and listen to our staff and listen to the feedback of our staff. And there was some valuable feedback that came out of that on building morale and building thoughts and feelings and how this year's going educationally. And I think it would be a great value if each of us heard from our staff members in our various buildings. So I would encourage everybody to reach out on this board and go visit. That's all. Oh, and I hope everyone had a happy Thanksgiving.
I will see you at the conference, as Chris will, because Chris and I and Dr. Summers are doing a presentation along with, in tandem with, I don't know if that's the correct phrase, with Schneider Electric. So we'll definitely be down there on Friday afternoon. But so yeah, always valuable information coming back from the Casby conference and looking forward to that. And that's all I have to say today.
Thank you all. I want to just reflect on the last couple months. And we had a young man come into our regular board meeting 2 months ago and bore his soul in some respects. It took a lot of courage to describe his personal issues with mental health. But I appreciated the value and the impact it had on me personally. So I grew a lot from listening to that young man share in his presentation. And I know in a short presentation, we only got a glimpse of what that's really about, but I appreciated it so much. Second, I have enjoyed the last 2 work sessions where we've actually had breakout sessions where we actually work. These exercises I'm inclined to say are very valuable. And I appreciate the interaction that it creates. And I see that hopefully into the future in these site-based, because it's this process, the exercise process, there's great value in this, and it's a way to hear more voices. But I still want to give kudos to the district administration for how we've evolved as you're all new and as you bring ideas from your past experience into this school system. And I've noticed, and I just want to thank you for your influence in where we're evolving to, because I see a lot of positives, and I just don't want to leave that unsaid, that we thank you for your input. And as you're learning about us, we're learning about you, and I like it. I hope you do as well, as much. I want to give thank you for the board members for their engagement in any capacity in our school system. And I appreciate the focus, the concern and care for the school system in its entirety, but most importantly for every child every day. I sense that all the time when we have conversations, and though we may have different perspectives on many things, that doesn't change the perspective and goal and what we really want to accomplish. And so I appreciate the unity that the goal or the priorities help create, and I appreciate also the openness and the trust that we have to share our perspectives. And the difference, the diversity of our perspectives is what makes this better. So thank you for all of that over time. And lastly, I would just like to thank each of the school principals and for the roles they play at each of the sites. And obviously I'm grateful for students. I'm especially grateful for my own. And I appreciate, that this year, or let me put that a different way, these last 2 years, I've seen agility in this school system that I, in retrospect, almost find it hard to believe, even though I witnessed it firsthand. So the agility with which this school system addressed a pandemic and yet continued to grow and focus on the future, the holistic approach to children, to our strategic plan, our system as a whole, is, I wish I had the right words to express how amazing these last 2 years have been. And Dr. Summers, I want to just conclude that with your leadership is so appreciated, and your ability to be agile, because you've had a few curveballs thrown at you these last couple of years. And I appreciate how you rally folks and stay consistent to this vision. And so, again, thank you for everything that you do, but most importantly for the agility and leadership that you walk. You don't just talk it, you walk the talk. And with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting until December 13th at our regular board meeting. Thank you.